The road to becoming a top player is filled with $34 paychecks, partially paid flights to random flyover states, and unexpected wins that puts your name in the mouths of random toxic kids on the internet. Awesome. In the past couple years, we've seen more players than ever competitively blossom from a player to watch out for to a top 20 staple. This video highlights bracket runs from players who pulled off incredible upsets in totally unexpected times, but also prove that their unprojected W's that first got them noticed were not a fluke. This is the intro to the sentence before the title screen, and here's Allston Melee's 10 upsets from future SSBM top players. It's a long one. Subscribe. Number 10, Captain Faceroll at some Midwest tournament. In early 2016, Outfoxed, a Melee 64 and Smash 4 regional, was gathering attention mostly from the featured player list. Initially just boasting Prince Abu and KJH, the tournament would also confirm Dreffin, Reeve, Dark Atma, Hugs, a bunch of Midwest talent, and the far and above first seed M2K. Captain Faceroll, even still coming from California, was kinda just another name in the bucket at the who can lose to M2K the least simulator of a tournament. Having started seriously playing the game just a little over a year before the event, due to Faceroll's local performances, he was given the 7th seed at the stacked event. But still, with his recent glimpse of the spotlight from playing in Irvine, a college who had incredible players, there was something wild about Faceroll's recognition. According to the 2015 Top 100 rank that had come out 4 months before the event, Faceroll was not even top 100. After winning his pool, Faceroll would also win his round 1 of his top 32 match against Reeve, but it would be the last set he was seeded to advance in the winner's bracket. Now facing a name that was very close to the top of the featured player list, a SoCal winner's quarters would take place as Hugs was his next opponent. Back in California, Faceroll had gotten many attempts, but at least at the bigger regionals, he hadn't prevailed over Hugs yet. But as you might be able to guess from his inclusion, that would change in Indianapolis. Faceroll would defeat Hugs 2-0, and after KJH beat Dreffin 2-1, KJH and Faceroll would be paired for top 8 winner semis. Playing for the first time, KJH would win the first game on Dreamland, Faceroll would win a tight Battlefield counterpick that was almost taken away, but when KJH counterpicked FD, the strong Fox counterpick, a tool was apparent in Faceroll's game that would become synonymous with his gameplay in later times. Faceroll would show his ability to reaction tech chase and hit the much needed edge guards in order to compete with the players ranked above him. In a Game 5, last stock, everyone forgets how to hold a controller scenario, Faceroll would find the F-tilt fair to pull his second upset of his top 32 winners run. Having just put the 2nd and 3rd seed into loser's bracket and now finding himself in winners finals, Faceroll would fall to Mewtwo King 3-0 and KJH in the run back 3-1. Faceroll had stuck himself from the gang of amazing Irvine players he was born from and would go unranked in 2015 to top 50 in the next year. 3 years after the event, and Faceroll has been solid ever since, with a 17th rank in 2019 and a 6-0 via 2 back-to-back wins over M2K in the same year. We put Faceroll as a strong start because we do believe that his extremely quick rise to being a top player is sometimes overlooked, and this was the first time a simpleton like us recognized Faceroll's talent. Number 9, Triff at Genesis 6. Inspired by Armada's career and retirement, Triff had been dedicated to putting European Peach back into the complaints of top-level Fox players. Tucked away from US majors for the span of a couple years, players outside of Spain were unsure how well the unproven Peach main would stack up. Triff's first American National was Shine 2017, where he wouldn't go untested, beating Kirby Kaze at his last out-of-Canada major after his retirement from the game. After showing what he was possible of in Massachusetts, Triff would be eliminated by Pew Pew Game 5 before top 12. At Big House 8 a few months after, his results probably didn't stand out the way he intended, losing to SFAT 3-0 and only taking a game from Absent Page. The big result Triff was searching for in the States wasn't coming up yet, but he was persistent to prove that his Peach could hang, no matter how many flights to a random US city from Madrid it was gonna take. At Genesis 6, the Spanish Peach was traveling a minimum 20 hours in the sky to get to Oakland, California. Barely pulling off a 2-1 win over Moki to make it out of pools, Triff had more than a hard bracket as the top 32 would show. As the 28th seed, Triff would now be up against Mewtwo King, the 5th seed, because double elimination brackets can be a sometimes. On a side recording surrounded by bodies, Triff would shockingly defeat Mewtwo King in the 5th game of their set. Being rewarded for all the hard work he had put in across his recent trips to the US and his consistent grind back in the EU, Triff would monster pop off and soft crowd surf into the people who crowded the CRT. Triff would end up losing to Pew Pew again after the set, and a loser's bracket mango for 9th place at the 6th Genesis. Along with his continued dominance once returning home to Spain, these tournament results would be proven to be not just a one-off for Triff. Soon after his Genesis performance, he was taking sets off of players like Zane and would eventually be rewarded the 16th place on the SSBM rank for his hard work in 2019. Number 8, Moki at Gommels. In 2017, there were 5.5 Canadian names on the top 100 rankings. Near the bottom of this pack and the rankings in general, Moki took the 96th spot at the end of 2016 once starting to attend majors outside of Canada. Having wins against basically all of the players in Canada, after his first region event at Big House 6, Moki already had wins on players like Cobal, Shroomed, and a few others. At Gommel 2018, after defeating in-region players for Wizrobe's DQ spot, Moki would be faced against the Fox veteran Ice, who had at least 5 years on him in Melee's competitive scene. Within the first 20 seconds of the set, Moki had already pulled off a clip that would make it into most combo videos on the best player in Germany nonetheless. The opening's energy would carry throughout the set, and Moki would pull off the 3-1 upset on Ice. And then he retired. Well, kinda. EMG, Moki's sponsor, would convince him to attend the following Gommel after not attending or playing Melee for a few months. The event's venue was pretty close to where Moki lived, and passing up the tournament with the 1,700 entrants and tons of talent would be dumb unless he really had no interest in Melee left. After running through his pool without dropping a game, Moki would defeat KJH Game 5 in his first set of Winners Top 64. Then playing Hungrybox, the expected easy win for the first seed was not present in this set, but Moki would ultimately fall after taking 2 games. Moki would make it into loser side top 16 and would yet again be seeded to lose to a Fox player, but this time to SoCal's own Lucky. And then, with a little bit of deja vu, in a similar fashion consisting of Fox combos you don't see in tournament, Moki would win yet again Game 5. And now facing Plup, Moki unfortunately had a bracket which consisted of the first seed in winners and the second seed in losers. Plup was coming off a loss to SFAT, but he was also coming off of top 3 placings at Genesis, Big House, and EVO in the months before. Moki, the 17th seed with one of the hardest brackets possible seeding-wise, would be constantly one step ahead of the person who had just been ranked 5th in the world. Moki would take the first 2 games in strong fashion and could have even gone the other way in the game after. Moki would win the set 3-1 with the Doraki wall jump shine so f***ing dirty people call it the Moki now. Moki Doki, along with having a phenomenal YouTube channel you should totally go check out, has shown that he is not just the 5th man in a 5-person Canada team that he was once ranked as, but as a top Fox player cut from the same cloth as his peers. And speaking of, number 7. None at Gommel 2016. Hopefully one day in the future, we'll get the full undisclosed tell-all None documentary because honestly we have a ton of questions. But back in 2016, a 19-year-old None had crafted his spot as the insane Falcon player. Not nearly as well known as he is now, the off-the-rails Canadian player was dead set on doing crazy shit you hadn't seen in a tournament yet. In 2016, Canada's premier Melee major, Get On My Level, would be a huge focus for the community, with it being the second tournament after Leffen received a work visa. Featuring all 5 active gods, conversations of how the top would play out were constant as they had not been united in a bracket for quite a while. Being one of the highest ranked players representing Canada, None would fall to the German Fox player Ice to make it to top 32 winners side. After making bracket from the loser's side, he would go on a 3-set losers run through Trillium, Pew Pew, and Hugs 86. On the other side of bracket, after losing in a Game 5 set to Leffen, M2K would drop down in losers to play None for 9th place. The set, against Canada's best wishes, would be insanely favored on paper from U2King. He hadn't lost to a Falcon player in over a decade since the days of Isaiah, Ken, and Azin. His Sheik, no matter what prodigy of the game was in front or beside him, was trained to decimate the Falcon players no matter how flowchart or flashy. But whether it was because of the screams of the Toronto crowd, the recent focus on other games, or maybe None just broke his brain, but M2K would quickly look lost in the matchup that he reigned over. None, now far and away the last Canadian standing, would pull off the massive upset on M2K with a question down smash and his region screaming behind him. None would lose to Lucky in the following first round of top 8, but from this point on, he'd maintain the ability to be one of the best players in the world while constantly going for insane shit. None would prove that whether the down smash was a fluke, the breaking of decade-old streaks was not, and would later be the first Falcon player to beat Mango since the days of Silent Spectre. None, still 19 years old to this day, is a staple of the top players we hope to see at major tournaments, and while we couldn't find the correct adjective to describe his playstyle, our eyes are always wide open when his Falcon's on screen. Number 6, Crush at Holiday Bash. In late 2017, a Summit-style event would pop up from the Twitch offices with, at the very least, somewhat sus intentions. But whatever, it happened and it was cool and important enough to make its way here. Holiday Bash would invite players who are all around the same top 15 to top 30 area because of the uncertainty and lack of results between a good chunk of them. 14 players were invited to the Twitch offices, paired into 2 separate round robins, filtering and eliminating into a 10-person bracket. The seeding for the event was what you're currently seeing on your screen, and the round robin pools definitely had an argument for some of the hardest ones ever, with actual melee summits being the opposing point. Regardless, the event was stacked to the brim, and the view from Crush's side looked steep. Previous to the event, Crush had proven himself as the far and away #1 player in New England, and while most people in our neck of the woods understood what was coming, Crush would get limited shots at majors up until 2016, and for the most part, still be generally considered an up-and-comer. Now entering 2017 with our favorite sponsor, EGTV, Crush would get the chances he deserved and start to get the victories that we in New England always thought he could, but Crush was still missing that breakout performance with a big run on the resume. At Holiday Bash, Crush would drop his first set to Duck, 3-1 in pools, but with 5 more sets to go, you can only really look forward. Crush would win every single set that he had left in the round robin, filled with multiple upsets and constant doubts that he'd keep going. After walking through everyone else and obviously making it into the real bracket, he'd be matched up with Shroomed and would continue the run with a 3-1 dub. Facing none in winter semis, he'd take his first loss outside of pools and drop to play Laud in losers, who had just defeated S2J. From this point on, Crush did not lose another set at Holiday Bash. Crush would beat Laud, Shroomed, None, and SFAT twice to win the tournament, to the expectations of practically no one. The event that was put on for players to differentiate. How do you say that word? Differentiate. The event that was put on for players to separate themselves would at least meet its own goals with Crush's performance, and he'd be placed at 15th in the world in 2017. Crush would continue this trend, traveling and consistently being on the verge of top 10 with a year of results to back it up until his soft disappearance from the scene in 2018. Number 5, Bananas gets a Summit invite. The Big House 8 in Detroit was home for more than 1,000 melee entrants and close to the entirety of top 100. But suddenly, Big House had more than just small cuts of a big prize pool for local heroes. Robin Harn's event also featured an invite spot for Smash Summit 7 to the highest non-invited player, and for most people, a Summit invite was the best practice and spotlight imaginable. Hidden among other players with more recognition, Bananas, an up-and-coming Ice Climbers player, had been gaining stock in and out of Texas. He had a growing list of wins at regional or bigger events, but nothing had fully boosted him out of the just another Ice Climbers player category yet. But beating Plup 3-0 off-stream at Big House sure as hell is a great start. Bananas was seeded 36th and was not even supposed to make it to Plup, but in round 1 pools the day before, he defeated IBDW 2-1. Plup had played 2 games of Samus in their 3-0 set, and while most people were convinced that's where it would end, it would prove to just be great practice for Bananas. The person who was grabbing, holding, and kill confirming the attention of Big House attendees would continue his reign with another sweep over Hugs 86 right after. Now about to play for a top 8 winner slot, the slew of upsets was sure to end as he was up against anti-Ice Climbers aficionado, Fiction. But not even the man who suffered through competitive brawl could stop Bananas. After beating Fiction, Bananas' Miracle on Ice run would end losing to Hungrybox and Zane, but he would be gifted 5th place and a Summit invite from it. Any Ice Climbers player rising in rank will be constantly looked at cautiously or doubtful, and being seeded 13th out of 16 would be where Bananas would be placed at Summit. In pools, Bananas would shockingly beat M2K in his first set, and while you could possibly make excuses for M2K's lack of confidence in the matchup, he would pull off an upset against Mango in literally the next set he played. Playing 3 gods in a row, HBox would be his only loss in pools, resulting in one of the craziest outcomes possible. In the actual bracket, he would have an unthinkable comeback in a set against Leffen, but still would ultimately lose in Game 5. Banana's back-to-back runs were incredibly remarkable, beating 2 out of 3 of some of the best players in the world and had Ice Climbers haters completely furious. Bananas takes our 5th spot because the players that follow him on this list have more of a consistent rise to the top caliber, but his insane peak cannot be swept away. Number 4, Axe in 2009. Hop in a time machine and we're going to a foreign hellscape of a world where Good Girls Go Bad by Cobra Starship was a thing and the Wii Fit was the best-selling video game on the market. In this alternate universe we'll nickname 2009, Bobby Scar is a toxic and mean top player, Hugs86 is only 35 years old, and Mango is the far and above #1 player in the world.
Style more thing. And yeah, I'm ready to go. That sounds good to me, man. Let's go.
After becoming a part of the scene through Smashboards, in 2009, Axe would travel from Arizona to California and enter his first nationally recognized event at the First Genesis. Playing Pikachu and Falco, the extremely kind-hearted Drake lookalike would pull off one of the biggest upsets of the tournament and beat Tri-State's #1 player, J-Man. J-Man was an already recognized top player at the time, and while some crazy shit would happen to him later in life, losing to a random Pikachu player at the time looked worse on his record than it did shining a light on Axe's. Axe would go 0-2 after beating J-Man, and while his name was being mentioned, people were overall unsure and kinda doubtful if he'd be able to pull off something similar to his Genesis run ever again. At Pound 4, the East Coast major event, the early dynamics of a holy pentagon were forming. Dr. PP, commonly referred to PPMD nowadays, was just fully entering the top food chain with a 2nd place finish at ROM 2. Axe, on the other hand, would just be seeded and partially recognized for the first time, and barely getting the recognition he'd wind up deserving. After running through at least 4 known top players, people had to assume this was the end of the road for Axe, with the top Falcon player Scar up next. Axe would prove that his win on J-Man was not an accident nor a gimmick, after 2-0ing Scar in a matchup that was still considered decently in Falcon's favor. No matter how much you believed in Axe's ability, with Dr. PP, the newest addition to the top 5 players, you had to assume the Piss Expert would have the green Falco victory screen. But judging just off of how many words are in this paragraph, Axe would pull off the mind-boggling win over Dr. PP. Now proving his worth against multiple matchups and players, in the years after Pound 4, Axe would not only become the best Pikachu player, but also someone able to make it to the end of any bracket possible. Axe, throughout his decade-long of playing Melee, has changed tier list, inspired countless players, and has dominantly claimed a top 10 spot every year since 2014, and even rose to number 4 in 2019. Number 3, Zane at Big House 6. In the summer of 2016, only playing the game for a little over a year at that point, Zane would be ranked the 6th best player on the MDVA power rankings, behind the hometown heroes that had stomped around Xanadu's forever. Self-claiming to be a doc kid partially inspired by M2K's Marth, even most of the MDVA PR wasn't thinking crazy highly of Zane's gameplay at the time. Previous to Big House 6, Zane entered the past 2 SmashCons, getting 33rd at both of them, but not really having the chance to showcase his Marth. In round 2 pools of Big House, seated 72nd, Zane would get a W over Taffokins, who was seated decently above him. To make it to top 64 winner side, Zane was up against Plup, the consistent player who was ranked top 6 in the world. We have to emphasize at this point, Zane was the epitome of an up-and-comer, not even being ranked in 2015. Not the people at the tournament, the MDVA power rankings, nor the people managing the stream schedule expected Zane vs Plup Sheik to be competitive. The first visual most people would see of what happened would be through a slowly updated Smash GG bracket that was boasting the had-to-be incorrect fact that Zane had won over Plup 2-0 in the second wave of pools. Eventually we would get word this was not an error and Zane had really won over Plup, followed by a phone cam recording of the set. Zane would go on to beat KJH 2-1 in the first round of top 64 that followed and take losses directly after. At SmashCon 2017, just a few months after, Zane would fully prove that this was not a fluke, only losing to HBox and M2K for 5th place. Beating almost all of the past and current MDVA goalposts at this tournament and starting a dominance over a certain NorCal Fox player. Zane would constantly be showing that he was a top-of-the-line threat through his future bracket runs, and by the time he would be crowned the Shine 2018 champion, his place at the top was already solidified. The top 4 of this list could honestly be roulette rolled and changed in any way possible, and no matter the outcome, we'd probably agree. Zane's amazing rush to being a top player deserves to be endlessly highlighted by similar YouTube channels for the end of time. Zane takes our 4th spot, but we'd be lying if we didn't have him at number 1 at some point. Number 3, IBDW at Smash Summit 8. IBDW's quick rise to the middle ground of the top 100 began when he started seriously playing the game around 2016. Only 2 years later, by the end of 2018, IBDW was number 1 in New York City over some pretty big names, but was still on the cusp of the top bigger events, regularly appearing in the 33rd to 17th spot at majors. IBDW's previous slot of 84th was skyrocketed to 34th, but that range was not good enough for the full hop-loving Fox player. After an always rough Summit voting process, IBDW would make it to the event on the back of New York and Extreme Viewers Summit votes. As the 14th seed entering the tournament, Smash Summit 8 would be IBDW's chance to prove to anyone who doubted him wrong, with the chance to play plenty of tournament sets against the top players. But he totally blew it. IBDW, aka Cody Schwab, went 0-3 in Summit pools, losing to Zane, Spud, and Ginger in that order. Cody's expression when losing says all the words needed, but luckily, because of the format Summit was using for this event, no player was eliminated in pools, and IBDW would get a shot tomorrow. He'd have the worst seed possible, and he'd have to pull off something special to get anywhere, but it was a shot. Being up against S2J round 1 of the tournament, regardless of seed and bracket placements, this was not the best draw for IBDW. He'd previously and continuously have problems in the Fox vs Falcon matchup, but at Summit, he'd win with an almost dominant 3-0 over S2J. Next up would be an already featured and previously M2K defeating Triff from Spain, and in the last stock of an even Game 5, Triff would find the W from a fair on a platform, and IBDW would be met with his 4th loss of the tournament. But as this was a new day and a new bracket, he'd still have an opportunity on the loser's side. IBDW would be forced into yet again another high-pressure environment, going Game 5 with Moki, but pulling it off in his favor after a fairly lopsided 5th game. Next, he'd be playing against Mango, who was just defeated by Axe, in a matchup that had been pretty heavily in Mango's favor in the 2 times prior. With the first 2 games of their set going even, it would take about 12 minutes for the commentators to even consider IBDW winning a real possibility. IBDW, the 14th seed of the tournament, would end Mango's Summit run and would proceed to the loser side of top 8. With the feeling of the world and his day 1 performance behind him, IBDW would run train over top 8 stable VGBC AMSA 3-0. Unable to avoid him any longer, next up he'd have the walking roadblock of bracket runs, Mr. Number 1 in the world, Liquid Hungrybox. If the set had betting odds at Vegas, HBox's side would look like our bank account after Royal Flush. No one in their right mind could justify the practice IBDW got from playing local 2 Saint would be enough to take down HBox, but who are you to tell a New Yorker how to live their life? Cody Schwab would take down HBox 3-1, followed by a final loss to Wizrobe for 3rd place at Smash Summit 8. IBDW's losers run would be a huge reason and assist to Axe for him to be able to win the event altogether. IBDW has almost completely held up to this standard and has continued to challenge the people at the very top of Melee's competitive scene. Admittedly, there is not another run on this list that had more gravity and weight to it than IBDW's, and the only reason he is held back at the 2nd spot is because at the time of Summit, IBDW was still someone slightly on the radar, and the entry that follows this had more of a drastic change from total random to consistent top player. And our number 1 upset from a future top player, AMSA at EVO 2013. Somehow always mentioned in every single one of our videos, in 2013, Melee would return to the EVO stage, which would prompt the travel reservations for plenty of players outside the US looking to make a debut. One of these players would be AMSA, a Japanese Yoshi player with a big, seemingly always present smile. Previously known for getting top 8 with Yoshi at a tournament in Japan, AMSA was labeled as a mid-tier hero and not much more than that. In AMSA's EVO pool, where he was seeded to lose every single set he played except for his first, he wouldn't drop a game. Making it into top 48 bracket, he'd play M2K Sheik, and while the crowd screamed for AMSA when he took the first game, Mewtwo King would win the next 2. After winning 1 more set in losers, Amsa would claim 25th place at the most stacked tournament to date. Because of his character and upsets, Amsa would get a magnifying glass put on him, but in return would get to play with all of the current top players, curious to see what he was like. Amsa would run so many of the current top 100 players close in these games that opinions would be completely split on Amsa after Evo. Some were claiming that he was already top 15, and others were convinced that Yoshi was a complete gimmick and it couldn't get Amsa that far after. In the first SSBM rank, Amsa was given the 77th spot for his Evo placing, and even though it was closer to the bottom, at least a couple people would claim that he was being seriously overrated and given too much spotlight for just one tournament. All the way in Japan, Amsa and Yoshi fans everywhere would have to wait a decent amount of time before knowing how real of a threat Amsa was or could become. 6 months after Evo 2013, we would see the red dinosaur yet again on US soil, with Amsa finally returning for Apex 2014. In pools of his first day of the tournament, Amsa would have the people talking from the very start of his bracket run. After defeating fellow mid-tier hero Green Ranger, Amsa would take down number 22 at the time, Chudat, 2-1. The next day of bracket for Amsa would continue all gas, no brakes, and in our personal favorite Silent Wolf losing to a mid-tier set, Amsa would claim his second top 20 win of the tournament with a 2-1 win over the Green Fox. Claiming his third and final top 20 win of the tournament over Fly Amanita, Amsa would lose to PPMD and Cobalt for 9th place. Anyone who labeled Amsa as a gimmick would eat their own words, and it was impossible not to be intrigued by someone who was ruining the previous opinions on Yoshi as a character. At Kings of Cali Forged a few months after, Amsa would get his run back from Evo 2013 and take his first W over M2K in the second set they ever played in tournaments. Nowadays, Amsa has defeated every single player on the 2019 top 10 and has completely shaped Yoshi's game plan and playstyle as a character. In just a couple months, Amsa went from just some random Yoshi player who did well in Japan to the guy that was being called a gimmick and overrated to an undeniable top 20 player. While Axe and Amsa's stories share tons of parallel, we put Amsa as our number one for how quick he rose to the top, but because he also did so in a much more fleshed out competitive scene. New players coming alive and creating narratives through upsets is an organ function in the body that's helping keeping Melee alive. Similar storylines are what birthed the top players of the generation before this one, and at some point, new narratives will fully take over this generation too. Rising to the top and proving your prowess through someone else's loss is a natural passing of the torch in the Melee scene. While we patiently wait for the next generation of Zoomer TikTokers to pick up Melee and learn the FD chain grabs or the correct aggro approaches, we will always find the time to highlight the storylines of the players that came before while this big ol' family grows a little bit bigger every day.